we're going to continue in practice 4.2, looking at the next three principles of conditioning: recovery, adaptation, and variance. So let's begin with recovery. And again, I think with recovery, especially among like endurance athletes, like runners, the rest and recovery is often minimized, or it's hard for them to do for some reason. Whether it's just the psychological aspect that they feel like they need to just keep on adding miles, or they've been conditioned in earlier days of their coaching where they were told that they need to just keep going. But the rest and recovery is very important for performance and injury prevention. So frequency has the inverse relationship with intensity, and we've mentioned that before. So the more we're working out days of the week, the lower intensity has to be. So likewise, the more intense the workout, the more rest we need. And after working out, usually for me it's like 2 or 3 days after a strenuous workout, but some people get it right away, is that delayed onset muscle soreness. And that the delayed onset muscle soreness, the DOMS, can impair performance later on. When we exercise, we feel sore and stiff afterwards, but really lighter movement can help flush that stiffness and soreness out of our body. So really in that rest and the recovery phase of working out, that's where the supercompensation takes place. And that's where especially during sleep and in the days to follow a workout, that's where all those hormone and those physiological, those chemical and enzymatic adaptations need some time to repair, rebuild, and maintain tissues. So, when the benefit of rest, after we exercise, we really exhaust the systems, immediately after a workout, our immune system is actually depleted a little bit. We're more susceptible to being sick until our body can compensate. So that rest and recovery really helps reduce injury, helps rebuild the body, and helps minimize fatigue and burnout. So really with rest, we need to think about the rest between sets. What's appropriate, right? Too much rest can be a negative thing. We'll talk about that with reversibility. But when we're talking about strength training, when we're talking about like lifting weights, if we're doing a higher reps endurance, we want a rest period of about 1 to 1 to 1 to 3. So what does that mean? If it takes a minute to do one set, we should have about a minute rest period between our sets. With strength and power, we're going to be recruiting more of that neuromuscular connections, so we need a little bit longer rest period for those systems to recuperate, like the phosphocreatine system. So with a strength and power workout, the appropriate rest is about 1 to 3 to 1 to 12. So again, what does that mean? If it takes 10 seconds to do a couple of reps, we need at least a 30-second to over a minute and a half rest for that. So moving on from recovery to adaptation, again, really in that progressive overload with appropriate recovery, then we see those appropriate adaptations, That's why we're doing all this stuff, so we can improve. So we look at adaptation, The body has to make appropriate adjustments based on training. So again, that's where the specificity plays into what kind of training are we doing to stress our body. And as adaptations, we tend to focus on the physical, our muscles, our lungs, our heart, but really there's a psychological aspect to it as well. And how many of us have plateaued before, right? We go to the gym, we're working out, but it just really doesn't seem like we're gaining anything from that. So that's where the adaptation has kind of plateaued, and usually that's after about 6 weeks of training. So we really need to mix it up a bit, and that's where we get into another principle of conditioning is variance. So again, when we talk about adaptation and specificity, we need to think about how we're moving our muscles as well. So just recall that concentric action is where the muscle is shortening against resistance. Isometric is where it's fixed against resistance. And the eccentric is where the muscle is lengthening against resistance. So again, how are we lifting? Right? There's evidence that the eccentric phase of the lift actually creates more adaptation. And again, think about the sport we want, right? If we want that power and explosion, we need to be lifting to generate power and explosion, as well as form. I think I mentioned form. We want that full range of motion in order to get those benefits. And the third principle of conditioning, or the sixth overall we'll talk about in this practice, is variance. So we want adaptation, but once we plateau, we want variance. But don't we want specificity? Right? We talk about specificity. You have to train the way you're going to compete. So what does variance mean? It's true we want to train the way we compete, but after, again, maybe that 6 to 8 weeks, our body adapts to that stimulus. So what we need to do is we need to mix up the type of stimulus in order to keep maintaining and stressing our systems. So we need to make adjustments, right? Maybe we're increasing mileage. Maybe we're increasing speed. Maybe we're increasing weight. Maybe we're incorporating new types of movement patterns. So what that does is physically it makes it interesting. Our body recognizes a new stimulus and then it has to adapt to it. But also psychologically it keeps it interesting too. It keeps us engaged, right? We're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. Every year when I get on my bike in the spring and I go for a bike ride, my muscles feel sore. Like I haven't used those neck and those quad muscles in that way for quite a while. But once I get some mileage under my belt on the bike, those muscles seem to adapt. But so we want to kind of mix it up that way. So we've heard of that idea of muscle confusion, and really that is just the idea of instead of going to the gym and doing 5 sets of 5 bench press every time we go, try doing single arm bench press on a exercise ball. Try doing a pec fly, or do other things to target those muscles rather than just a straight up bench press. So that we'll look at the remaining 2 principles of conditioning in the final video for this practice.